Okay, okay. So this is the World Thoroughbred Racehorse ranking website. Is that good? Okay, so looking at the Saudi Cup, you can see the figures for the Saudi Cup. We're currently actually in a horse's individual page, the page of Midnight Bourbon. So I'm going to ask Phil to go to the actual race itself. And if he clicks on Saudi Cup over there, you can see that now you've got the result for the race. So you can see Emblem Road at the top, because obviously you won the race. Country Grammar all the way down to Mishrif at the back. And over here, these are our figures. So KSA is the figures, that's the figures that I put in. And I went with a rating of 121. And let me just give you a quick background as to the reasons why I did that. So first of all, you've got a gap from Emblem Road to Country Grammar of half a length. I called that 2 points. Sometimes you may only call it 1 point. I called it 2 because I felt like he won going away. He had to come wide. I wanted to call it 2 points rather than 1. So first of all, I've called that 2. And then from Country Grammar to Midnight Bourbon, I've also called 2. That was a length and a half, and I've called that 2 as well. The weights were the same, so we don't need to worry about the weights carried. So I've got 121, 119, 117 for the first 3. Now, the reason I like that figure is because if I ask Phil to now click on Midnight Bourbon, and you'll see Midnight Bourbon's previous race to this. So this is the Saudi Cup. His previous race was in the Louisiana Stakes at Fairgrounds. And in that race, he finished second to Mandaloun. And I have the same figure in this race that I then used in Riyadh. So that's where I get the 117, thus giving us the 121 for Emblem Road.
Is everybody happy with it being in English, or do you need Joseph to translate? All good?
It's okay.
All good? Great.
Okay, and a couple more points because I don't want to dwell too long on the same races. I also did a time comparison for the local handicap won by An Alawan. That horse is going to be going to a new rating of 100. And the calculation for the difference in time is that Emblem Road ran 21 points faster than An Alawan, which also gives me 121. The time is slower than Mishrif last year. We gave Mishrif 122, slightly slower than Mishrif. So again, that makes me happy with 121.
Okay, so as you can see, just for this one race, Stephen went through 3 or 4 different ways of calculating the horse's performance figure. He looked at another race on the day and did a time comparison. He looked at last year's race and did a comparison between Emblem Road and Mishrif. And he also used, as what we call a guide, and he used Midnight Bourbon as the guide, and his figure for Midnight Bourbon was 117. Now, what you'll notice, which of course is in many ways the most interesting thing, is that these figures are all different depending on which country you represent. So, for example, I represent Bahrain. So my figure here is in this column here, right? So I've got Midnight Bourbon on 118, right? Because in the past, I've got him on 118. I thought he'd run a really good race. So you can see why there's occasions where we will differ. The international handicappers will be slightly different, but we're only ever 1 or maybe 2 difference around the world. And if you look at the Saudi Cup, particularly this year, you'll see the differences that people have done from around the world. So, I've got 121 for the winner. So has Stephen gone 121. Australia, they think the performance was only 120. Right? They've just calculated it slightly different. There is no right way to do this. There is no wrong way to do it. It's what you believe. You've got the facts in front of you, and it's your interpretation of the facts. Working our way along, Ireland 120, France 120. GB thinks it was a better performance than we do, 122. And you're probably thinking now, how does this all work out in the end? Sorry? We're all talking about the same horse, yeah? And yet we're one or two different, right? Now what will happen is that in July, I will go to a meeting in Dubai. Last year it was on Zoom. I hope this year I'll be able to go. And we will discuss all of the horses in the Asian region, right? So we will discuss Hong Kong, we will discuss our horses, we'll discuss Bahrain horses, Dubai horses, and the handicappers in that meeting will decide an end-of-year figure for, obviously in our case, Emblem Road, and in our case, for Making Miracles. Right? And that will be published, and that's very, very important because that horse will take that figure at the end of the year figure, and that's its figure for life. Right? Right? Now, if next year Making Emblem Road gets a figure of 124, higher, that will become his new for life figure. Right? If he doesn't do as well next year and he only gets 118, he keeps the 121 because it's the bigger figure of the two. It's the higher figure of the two. So there's our assessment of the Saudi Cup. Who would like to ask a question? So far, happy? Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Got a question? Yes.
Does the time give us any idea that we can give him an edge of rating?
Well, Stephen is our time expert, so he will answer the question about time.
So you're talking about what, the time of the race?
Yeah, if the performance is going with a better time, will that give a better rating for him? Like how he has given 121. If he had done a timing with a better than this, how would that be?
Oh, well, okay, so that's a little bit more complicated. So if you want the exact calculation for, so for example, I told you it was 21 points faster than Arn Alawan. The calculation then is based on the difference in the time. So his final time, which was a minute 50.52. You subtract the time of Arn Alawan, which was a minute 52.46. You would multiply that by what we call the points per length we use, which at 9 furlongs is 1.625, and then you would multiply that by the lengths per second, and I think it's 5.5 lengths per second, and that should come out at 21. So we get the distances. So you can see the distances, right? Half a length, 2 lengths. Sorry, that's cumulative distances. Half a length, 1.5 lengths, 3 lengths, 1.25 lengths, etc. So that is calculated not by a literal measurement, it's calculated based on time. And the calculation we use to do that is 5.5, it's 5, well, on dirt it's 5.5, isn't it? 5.5 lengths per second on dirt and 6 lengths per second on turf. So you then have to calculate that, you have to incorporate that, into the time. So you would do the difference in the time, multiply that by the lengths per second that we use, which is 5.5 in this race, and then multiply that by the points per length, which in this race is 1.625 on dirt. Over a mile it would be 1.75, and it's different for every distance because the longer the distance, the less points per length that you would use. So to cut a long story short, the time for this race comes out 21 points faster than for Arn Alawan in the local handicap.
And sticking with time, right? Stephen's already said that last year Mishrif got 122. And if you look carefully at the screen, you'll see this year Emblem Roads was 150.52. Keep that in your mind. 150.52. And last year, Mishrif 149.59. So Mishriff's time last year was just a little faster than Emblem Road's rating this year. So this is why we're really confident about the level this year. Not only have we got a reliable guide, the third horse, but also we've got 2 times, and it's not like they're running on turf where the ground varies. Sometimes it's soft, sometimes it's good to firm. The dirt surface is pretty consistent. So when we're comparing times, certainly on the same day, and even as far apart as a year, we're pretty confident that Mishriff's performance was just slightly better than Emblem Road's was this year. But that's a real good question. Anybody else got any questions before? Of course.
Just an example. Suppose that Emblem Road got faster time, the local bred horses in. Would he get better rating?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. A lot depends on the conditions on the day. But if you're talking, there was no faster or better time on Saudi Cup Day than this particular time. It was Emblem Road's time was a really, really good time. But it wasn't as fast as last year's run by Mishriff, So what that does to Stephen, who's making the calculation, he says to himself, okay, I think the horse is 121 when we use Midnight Bourbon as our guide, as our level, and it's confirmed when he looks at the time and compares it with last year, and it's confirmed when he looks at the other winner that he's been talking about, who he says he's moved to 100, and he said there's 21 between them. So there are 3 different ways which has led him to that figure. Now, it's very unusual where you get as many facts which support your decision. Sorry, and what's the question? Tell me again. If a local horse does faster than 149.59, okay.
Faster than Emblem Road. Emblem Road himself.
Okay. What that will do, yeah,
Good time.
yeah, okay.
Faster time.
Yeah, well, it depends on the opposition in the race, right? Because obviously the track just varies a little, doesn't it? For example, I was just looking at a race in America over the weekend, and the track was sloppy.
But Kevin, he compared last year.
Of course, of course, of course, of course. But all that's doing is supporting what you already believe, making him more confident, right? But what was the main thing he said? It was this, right? The main thing is Midnight Bourbon. That's the number one fact that starts making him think that because of Midnight Bourbon, he believes that Emblem Road is 121. Now, can he find another way of proving that as well? And he's come up with 3 different ways to prove that Emblem Road is deserving of 121. Sometimes we're not sure. That's what happens in life. We're not sure about something, right? Because we've only got one fact which supports what we think is the correct level, right? When you're getting as many as 3 facts, you're more confident, yeah? That's the same as in life, isn't it? Good. Anybody else got a question about this? Of course. Usually, yes. It's very, I've never ever I've been doing this for 25 years. I have never had a maiden winner on 121. Never. Right? Depending on the type of race when you rate the horse. Of course, we look at the time, but it's highly unlikely that a maiden winner would be anywhere near 150, 52. Very unlikely. Right? The highest level I've ever had a maiden winner is 102, and I've only ever had 1. Right? So most of the time, and we'll come to levels for maidens a little bit later, and we'll show you the type of ratings and performance figures that we get for maidens. But we will get to that. Okay? Can we move on to another race on the big day? Yep.
So just to underline, the most important thing is the result of the race, the horses that were involved in the finish near the front of the race, and then time is an important factor, but it's not the most important factor, but it can be very helpful, particularly on a dirt track as good as the one here in Riyadh, because the track is very consistent, the rail stays in the same place. For example, in the turf races, the times for the turf races at this year's Saudi Cup meeting were much, much different from last year. And I've not been told, but I'm guessing that the reason for that is probably that the rail is in a different position. So that a time comparison for last year and this year on turf is useless. But I think they're faster this year, but it's probably due to the rail alignment. So what I'm saying is that the times, it's pointless to compare the times. Usually it's not a good idea to compare times on different days, even on dirt. But with the Saudi Cup, the level is so high. I like to look at what happened last year, because then you're comparing excellent horses to other excellent horses. It's harder to compare excellent horses to low-grade horses. So that's why I look at last year for the Saudi Cup. Usually outside the Saudi Cup, I wouldn't usually compare different times on different days.
I have a question for you, okay? And can you just vote by putting your hand up, okay? Mishrif against Emblem Road. Obviously, Mishrif underperformed at the weekend, but you all know a lot about Mishrif. And now you know a lot about Emblem Road. In your view, can you vote, please? Which do you think is the better horse of the two, Mishrif or Emblem Road? Can you put your hand up if you think Mishrif is better than Emblem Road? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many people think that Emblem Road is better than Mishrif? 1, 2, 3. Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8. So did I say this season? I didn't say that. You don't add little bits to my questions. Okay? That's cheating. So, obviously, the other day, Emblem Road was much better than Mishrif. So what do we know about Mishrif the other day? He massively underperformed. As handicappers, when a horse massively underperforms, we ignore the run, because it's not told us anything that we didn't already know. So it's interesting. We believe, and 4 other people did, thankfully, right, that we believe that when you look at the records of Emblem Road and we look at the record of Mishrif, their overall record, who do we think is better? We think Mishrif, right? At the end of last year, Mishrif was given a rating by the international handicappers of 127. So there's still a little bit of a way to go, the handicappers believe, to get Emblem Road as high as Mishrif. Now, by the end of this year, I don't believe Mishrif will run again, right? So he will be still 127 from last year. The interesting thing will be, is can Emblem Road get to 128? Easily, inshallah, yeah. Easily, inshallah, definitely. Okay, I will tell you how we can do that, right? Win the Breeders' Cup Classic. Then he will get higher than Mishrif if he wins the Breeders' Cup Classic. But of course, that's in November, and a lot of things can happen between now and November. Okay, we're going to move on to the Saudi Derby, right? And we'll go through the same process with you again, Stephen will, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, as Phil was just saying, so this race was, I was really pleased with this race because off the top of my head, last year, our highest rated local horse in this race was 95. And I had Al Nada, who finished 4th on 107 going into the race. And I was a bit worried I got a bit carried away with him. But I actually thought he ran a really good race and he justified his 107 rating. So my figures are largely based on him repeating his 107, because this is a 3-year-old only race, and particularly as we have international horses in here and they're younger horses, it's hard to get a pretty good guide to the level of the race. So I thought he was a pretty good guide to use. But what I actually want to talk about in this race is something a little bit different, because one of the things that we have some issues with sometimes is that I think people don't understand that the weight horses carry is a crucial aspect in our calculations. And in this particular race, Pinehurst actually carried 55.2 kilos and Sekifu carried 55.8 kilos. So the 0.6 of a kilo extra that the runner-up carried is equal to 1 point. Now, the winning distance of half a length, you could call... I actually called it 2 points because I thought the winner probably, if anything, went too fast and did well to hold on, so I called it 2. But if you called it 1, which actually Mr. Smith did, this is the Bahrain column, he's got 112 for the winner and 112 for the runner-up. And that's actually the same figure due to the fact that the runner-up carried more weight. So... obviously, in this case, the extra weight is only half a kilo, but in a race like, for example, a handicap, you could have a difference of 62 kilos at the top, 54 kilos at the bottom. So if the horse carrying 62 kilos finishes second to the horse carrying 54 kilos, there's a good chance that the runner-up is still the best horse because it carries so much extra weight, and that's one of the things that we're trying to teach to you gentlemen today.
You probably will have noticed in one of the Jockeys Challenge races, a race when Olivier Pellier finished second. And he put up, was it 1.5, Stephen? Yeah. Olivier Pellier finished, he was just beaten, very short distance in one of the Jockeys Challenge races, and he carried 1.5 kilograms over, 3 points. If he'd done the proper weight, his horse would have won. We have too many jockeys here carrying overweight on a daily basis. Way too many. You need to check with your jockeys, can my jockey do the weight that he has to do in this race? Because if he doesn't, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Right? Now, there are a number of ways that we can improve on this situation. One way is to say that in Saudi Arabia that we'll put the weights up. So that instead of having a handicap where the top weight is 62 kilograms and the bottom weight is 54, we'll make the top weight 63 kilograms and the bottom weight 55 and make it easier for the jockeys. Or maybe the jockeys need to work harder on their fitness. Right? There are a number of ways that we can do something. We can change the conditions, right? The jockeys can work on their diet and their fitness, or you can find out about what your jockey's weight is likely to be. And if you consistently not put on a jockey who's going to do overweight, they'll soon learn. Right? But overweight is a big, big problem. Right? And that's why Stephen all the time, and my figures here, you can see mine here, 112 and 112. And people will say, how can he do that? How can he have the second horse the same as the winner? Well, I can, right? Because Sekifu carried too much weight. He carried 55.8 kilograms. And therefore, in my view, 0.8 of a kilogram was equal to 1 point, and as a result, I've got them both the same. Very, very important, the weight that they carry. Has anybody got any questions about anything to do with the Saudi Derby? We found this a pretty easy race to assess, right? Because we had this fantastic horse here, Al Nada, right? And we thought, we've got Al Nada. He is the guide in this race, and everything works from Al Nada, and it made life, much easier. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to find a guide that you think is suitable. But with Al Nada here, really, really helped us. So he goes into the race, his rating is 107. He performs to 107. It doesn't take a genius to work out that coming out of the race, his rating is 107, right? We like it when it's easy like that, right? Because it makes us more confident about the level that we've got the race. A question, of course.
Yes, based on what? You think this race is easier than other race? What makes you feel that this is easier?
Because we've got a horse that's run well. Al Nada, everybody would say, he's beaten 2 1/4 lengths. So he's run really, really well. Going into the race, Stephen had him on 107, right? So we've based the race around him at 107. Now, I think what you're hinting at, I think what you're saying is, how do we know we're right? How do we know that? And the answer is, we don't know we're right. But what we do in the future, in the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we will be looking at how all these horses run. And if they all struggle, we will come back to this race and we will downgrade the race. Or if they all win next time, we will come back to the race and we'll upgrade the race. That's only where we are at the moment. It could change. Yes?
I did not get that.
Okay.
What makes you to choose another
As the guide.
than Midnight Bourbon
Okay.
to be a criteria?
Yeah, okay. How do we choose it as a criteria?
Yeah.
Okay? Because he's a local horse, right? So he's used to the track, right? That's his rating going in. We know he can do that from races here in the past, right? So we're saying at this point in time, with the things that we know, we're happy to have him on 107. But this is just the situation today. What's going to happen in the future? We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but if these horses all go upwards, then we will go back to this race and we'll put the level up of the whole race.
What about the Midnight Bourbon?
We do it exactly the same. So if, for example,
You just choose him as a criteria,
as a criteria, because,
not another horse.
right, because he's reasonably close to the front of the race, so that's a criteria, right? We're not going to choose a horse as our guide that finishes last, right? We're not going to. So we're always looking for something in the first 4 or 5 that we think has reproduced what we know it can do in the past. So somewhere in the first 4 or 5, we hope. In one of the races that we'll see in a minute, I chose the horse to finish second. Yep.
You've also got Sovereign Prince. We've got him running
Oh
the
yes.
same figure
Yep.
as Indy.
So we got 2 guides. We've got 2 guides. So Sovereign Prince in this race, 104, and Stephen had it 104 in Maidan. So we've now got figures from 2 different countries coming together. The one thing that has changed in Saudi Arabia is you're interested in your local rating. We're trying to put our ratings in the international level. Right? And that's why things have completely changed over the last few years, because Saudi Arabia is now an international country, not just a country on its own. And I think we probably all think that's a good thing, don't we?
Yeah.
I think we all think that's a good thing. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? You've got 2 good questions. I'm impressed. Yeah. Yeah, you're top of the class so far. He's top of the class so far. He's got 2 good performance figures, right? But let's see. And you have a good rating. You'll have a great rating. Okay. Let's hope he doesn't underperform next time. All right. Okay. Great so far. Any other questions about this particular race? So should we move on to another race? Yeah. Happy? Great. Just do one more of these.
You want to just do one more? Which one? Yeah, we're spending long days. We're spending quite a long time, aren't we? We talked about time. Haven't we?
What about the neon? Or use that one with springs? How about the neon?
Maybe the neon or Songline. We kind of covered about the weights, haven't we? Yeah. Do the neon. Okay. Yeah, let's do the neon because yeah.
Wow, this is a great race for this seminar. Great race. Because we have a winner of this race who has underperformed. Even though he's won the race, he's underperformed. And Stephen will tell you how and why.
So another another disagreement we sometimes have with the horsemen here is that a horse sometimes wins a race and people are confused as to why the rating doesn't increase. Now, sometimes the reason for that is that the horse doesn't need to improve, and that's the case with the Neom, because you have the winner, Authority, another Japanese horse. So he comes in on a pre-race rating. This is a Japanese pre-race rating but you agreed with it, didn't you? Of 121. The runner-up, Caspar, who's a locally trained horse, had 109. Byra, the third horse, the filly, 112, and Harrovian, 109. So you can see that he went into that race. He was entitled to win the race. Okay, so he did win the race, and he won the race by a length and a quarter, which is a decent margin, but it's not a wide margin. So I've used 1.7 points per length and given him an extra 2 points, but the weights were the same, so that only gets me to 4 points between the winner and the runner-up. So let's say we have Authority running to his 121. That means that Caspar, carrying the same weight and 4 points worse, has run to 117. And I just didn't really believe that Caspar was that good. If you look at, can you click on Caspar's form? So Mr. Smith is going to click on Caspar, and this is going to bring up his career in group and graded races in the world. So these are all his figures, and his best previous figure, I believe, is down here, 115, and that was in 2020. Last year, he won in Germany and was given a figure of 113, and he got a world rankings figure of 113 as well. So for me, 113 is a better guide for him, particularly. I think 117 would be a bit generous based on his past level of form. And now if Mr. Smith clicks on the Neom again, and not only does Caspar kind of, what we would say, hold down the level a little bit, the third horse actually doesn't, but the fourth horse, if we click on that horse, you'll see that, okay, he doesn't have as many performances at this kind of level, but his best previous performance was 109. So again, if you go 121 on the winner, you're then saying that he's improved to 116 or something. It's just hard to believe. So the point we're trying to make is that sometimes if you have a horse that's entitled to win the race because it's clearly the best horse in the race, sometimes the rating will not go up, even if the horse wins, because the horse may not have had to improve on what it has done in the past.
Absolutely. Now, that's something that I think is really important that everybody takes on board, that you have a horse that's won. You could see the Japanese, they were celebrating. They think they've got the most fantastic horse, and they have. But when they come and analyze the real level of the race, they will say to themselves, well, actually, this is wonderful and we're very, very happy, but what have we actually beaten in this race? If you look at the ratings going into the race, right? Harrovian was 109 going in, and Stephen has had to increase him for finishing fourth to 112 just to get Authority to 117. If he'd used Harrovian as the guide and said, I think that Harrovian has reproduced his figure from England, and he's only performed to his pre-race rating of 109, then all of these figures would have had to be 3 lower, right? And he doesn't believe that, right? And we've looked back at Harrovian over the last 2 or 3 days. We've looked back at Harrovian's previous best performances, and actually we've got a performance that we actually think he may have been 112 in a race in the past, right? And that's because of what the winning horse did after that. When we were talking before, let's see, this is where we are now, but who's to say where we're going to be in 2 months or 4 months or 6 months? We've got lots of performances through the year, obviously in Europe, right? But this is just where we are at this point in time. So we'll be looking really closely at what Harrovian does and Grosser Jack does when they go back to England and they have a summer in England. we'll be looking closely at how those two horses perform, because they've finished third, fourth, fifth in this race. And as we said earlier, it's very important that your third, your fourth, your fifth, your guide horses support the race later in the year. What we would hate to see now is Harrovian going back to England, right, and performing to 82, 88, 91, 96. We'd have to come back to this race and downgrade it, right? So handicapping is not just about on the day. It's not just about coming into the race. It's what happens subsequently. Yes, Sarah? No, you should be constantly referring back. So every time these horses run again, let's take Grosser Jack. Right? Now, Grosser Jack was a German horse, and it's now an English horse. It's moved yards, right? And we were pretty well happy that last year he was 112. We're going to have to look at Grosser Jack now. He's changed trainers. He's gone to England from Germany. We've got to keep looking at Grosser Jack and see what he does in his next, then 2 runs down the line or 3 runs down the line. He's an important horse. Casper, obviously, is a crucially important horse. Now, we're not worried what La Casa Tarifa does in the future, because she's too far down the race to make any effect on anything, right? We wouldn't be worried too much about what the horse that finished 9th does over the next 4, 5, 6 months, because La Casa Tarifa, beautiful filly as she is, right, she's underperformed in this race, right? We think she's better than that, La Casa Tarifa. So the fact that she goes and wins her next 2 will bear nothing to do with that. But we'll be looking really closely at what Authority does when he goes back to Japan, because we've had him slightly below his best at this race. So let's see what happens. He goes back to Japan, and if the Japanese handicappers have him doing 117, 16 in the future, that will support this, right? But if Authority goes back to Japan and does 108, 109, 110, then we'll start to think that even at this level, we're maybe too high. Okay, but yes, you're right. We keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. Once they've all run 2 or 3 times through the summer, we probably wouldn't be looking at them as closely, particularly for this race. But yes, it can. Sometimes I've changed a horse when something's happened 4, 5, 6 months later, right? But you build up a picture, really. Anybody else got a question? Yes, sir. Sorry, say this again. We haven't looked at how we get a guide, yeah? Well, if we do the same method every time, then at least we're consistent with ourselves, right? We don't know what the handicappers in Hong Kong or England or France are doing, except for the fact that they put their figures on our system, right? But as long as we use the same method every time, you try and find a guide. Sometimes you can't find a guide. Nothing fits suitably.
So what would you do in this case? You don't
Okay,
find the guy.
something that we do a lot of when you're still top of this class, can I just say, right? I'll tell you something we do a lot of, something that Stephen referred to earlier. We look at previous editions of the race, right? What's the winner normally from this race? And we might go back 5 or 6 years and we write down what we give the winner of this race. Obviously, in this case, it's only been 3 years. What we gave the winner in the past. And we look at maybe, for example, let's say it's the English Derby. We might look back 5 years and see what the winner was over the last 5 years. And we use that. So if we've got nothing to go on, we perhaps take an average, or we'll say, well, we think this was a not a very good Epsom Derby, so we'll give it quite a low figure of the last 5 years. If we think it was a great Derby, really fast time on decent ground, we might think we'll give it a high figure, right? But looking at previous runs of the same race is really interesting. And as an example, Stephen mentioned it earlier, Mishrif last year, 122 was he? 122. So Mishrif 122. This year, Emblem Road, not quite as good, but it's pretty close, isn't it? And you tend to find that in the big races, there's not much variation from year to year, right? Occasionally something will be fantastic, and occasionally something will be not very good. but by and large, they stay around the same. And the winner, I think, of the Saudi Cup in year one, right? When at the time, what did we give him? I think 123, 24. Maximum security was the first one past the post. We gave him 123, 124. So again, you can see they're all pretty close together. And you tend to find that all over the world, right? But just every now and then, something does nothing. So again, good question. What do you do if you haven't got a guide? You have to find something else, right? The other thing that you can do is you have because we've done this job for some years, same as in your jobs, you have a feeling, you know? You feel inside, I know what this is, but I can't prove it, right? So we will put that down, and that's when it's really important to keep looking back and looking back from Sarah's question before. Keep looking back, because we weren't sure at the time what it was, right? So we want more proof in the future as to what really happened. Where are you going next, Stephen? Are we going to go back to the races, the local races?
We'll do the local races, yeah. Just to touch on that, though, when you got a good example, when you got very little to go on, take, for example, the first 2-year-old race of the season at Taif. None of the horses have run before, so the only thing I can really do at that point is look at the times and maybe take an average from past seasons, and then you have a starting point, and then you see if the race is working out well based on what they do next time, or if it's working out not so well what they do next time, and then maybe you go back and adjust the level. But when you have very little or nothing to go on, you can look at times, you can look at past renewals, and you just come up with your best estimation from that.
And thinking of that, right, we're now going to look at a maiden that was run a couple of weeks ago in Riyadh, right? Because with maidens, as you well know, there are lots and lots of the horses who've only run maybe once or twice or never run at all. And we have a view of what the likely level is of a typical maiden. And if you look at the first column, Stephen's going to go through the first column with you now. This is their official pre-race rating. This column here in blue, really important column. What was the horse going into the race? Right? Okay, so what do we know about single-minded? He must have run at least twice, maybe more, because he's got a rating. Same with the second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth. So we know more about these guys, we know less about this lot, because they haven't got a rating yet, which means they can only have run either once or twice or never at all. Right? And so look at the level of the horses that we know something about, right? Comparing what we've just done. You know, Emblem in the 120s. Right? Look at this lot. 73, 75, 71, 68, 65. Right? And this would be a typical main race in Riyadh. And I think I mentioned earlier, the highest figure I've ever put in 20 odd years, only once, for a maiden, 102. Right? It's the highest figure ever. Most of the time, well, Stephen will tell you what happens most of the time in maidens.
Yeah, and so obviously I'm the regular handicapper for the local Saudi races, so I know that this being a maiden race for imports and locals, and it's open to colts and geldings, this is potentially an above average maiden race. For example, a Saudi bred fillies maiden is less likely to be as competitive because it's more restrictive. So, this is, as you can see, the pre-race ratings of the first 5, 73, 75, 71, 68, 65. We had a question at the beginning, you know, about a filly who you thought was rated maybe a little too low. But sometimes it depends on the company they're keeping as well. That's the times are important, but the most crucial thing is the level of competition they face in the race that day, the weights carried, and the distances between all the horses. Now, one thing I mentioned was distances, so you can see that there's only a neck between the winner and the second. That's obviously a very small distance. But we have quite a large field here, as we usually do, and the first two have finished 8 lengths clear of the third horse, so that tells you the first two have probably run very well. And that's reflected in the fact that the winner has a new rating of 84, the second has a new rating of 82, and that would, I would say, be well above average for this type of race. I would say that those would be above average post-race ratings for the first two in a maiden race. Obviously, if it's the Saudi Cup, it wouldn't be. It would be a lot lower, but because this is more at the other end of the scale, then we're obviously dealing with lower ratings.
It's interesting, isn't it? There's three horses there with overweight, and the winning distance was a neck. That could have potentially cost that horse.
Could have cost the winner the race.
Absolutely. Yeah, because he carried 58, was it single-minded? Yeah. Single-minded carried 58.3, and he's won by a neck. Now, what if he carried 58.6? He's probably second. Probably. If he carries 58, right, he'll get an extra point, and instead of being 84, he'll be 85, because he's carried less weight, right? And 85 is quite a nice rating to have, right? So the jockey, because he couldn't do the weight, or maybe you, because you put the wrong jockey on, knowing he couldn't do the weight, right, has prevented the horse from getting what he truly deserves.
Well, I have questions for you.
Yes, sir.
If my horse had blocked in the race
Yes.
and he could do better, is that you consider?
Well, we consider lots and lots of things, right? And you can see on the right-hand side here, for every race, if something happens in the race that we want to remember in the future, obviously you have to write it down because we can't remember from day to day to day. So here, right, 0.3 kilograms overweight, always holding on. So what Stephen has done here, he says that even though the distance is is only a neck, he always felt that the winner was always going to win, right? And that's why he's put this always holding on. And as a result of that, right, together with the overweight, together with the distance and the fact that he was always holding on, he's called the margin 2, 84 to 82. So all of these things, you're absolutely right, we take them into consideration. Now, you mentioned about a blockage. We could show a race now, and I would say to everybody here, right, how much do you think, how many length do you think that blockage has caused? And we would all come up with a different answer, right? So blockages are really difficult to factor in. But yes, we do factor it in, but don't overestimate. You know, don't be adding on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe 1 or 2 with a blockage, right? But it is something that we consider. And you can see all of this here, right? And I think this is the most interesting one, right? This horse here, Al-Qadram, he goes into the race on 65. He underperforms. His performance figure is 56. So he's got a potential to be dropped here because he's underperformed. And yet, here, he's still on 65. We left him. Why? Hampered at the start, and he went wide round the turn. So you can see, because this was a question that you asked me earlier, right? You can see that we try and tell each other, because there are 3 of us who work on this, right? And Stephen lives in Florida. Colin lives 300 miles north of me in England, right? And we have to be able to communicate our thoughts about all of the horses to each other. Sorry? Well, but it's good fun. It's good fun, right? So here, Keen hung left throughout. You know, so the horse is constantly lugging over to the left. So, you know, when you have a situation like this, here's another underperformer. Rating 68, performance figure in this race, only 61, right? And we have a reason why, right? So these are all reasons. Here's another one. He hasn't got a rating, this guy, right? Missed the break, and he was last leaving the back straight. So maybe Al-Wabel finished 7th. He's done pretty well to do that, considering what happened to him back here. So all of these things, as you can see, we put in under the remarks. So Stephen will know what Colin thinks, I will know what Stephen thinks, etc., etc., etc. Right? So we try and communicate with each other, because remember, all you get in the race is a performance figure, And then that is a building block which leads to a rating. Okay? Yes, come on, test me again.
Does the stall number in the starter, does it matter?
That's another. Do you want a job? Come on. Right? Really good question. Do you think it matters here? Do you think the draw is fair? The draw is fair here, or do you think low numbers have an advantage, or high numbers? I'm going to answer what I think in a minute. I'll ask Stephen. But what do you people think? Do you think it has any effect, the draw?
It's a short distance.
Yes.
The short distance, possibly. Yes. But at maybe 2,000 meters.
No, no.
Okay. I agree with you over that. What do you think, Stephen? Because you're dealing with these horses day after day after day.
Yeah, I agree with exactly what you said. The only distance at Riyadh I would really think that the draw makes a difference is probably 1,200 meters because they have such a short run to the bend, and I think a wide draw, particularly if you've got an 18-20 runner race, I think a high draw is probably a disadvantage over a very short distance. I think maybe at Taif, even over the longer distances, maybe a little bit as well because it's a bit more of a shorter turning track. But here, I would say probably just 1,200 meters would be the only distance I would really think the draw would be a big factor, unless a horse was drawn high and it was unable to get over at any point. If it's going 6-7 wide round the whole turn, then that's when I would put a note that it raced wide, and that obviously then alerts me to the fact that it may be better than what we have it rated. And to touch on the point the question that you asked that Mr. Smith tried to answer, it's not so much that if a horse has a troubled run that we would add to its performance figure and give it a higher official rating, but it's more that if it is an underperformer, it gives us an excuse not to lower its official rating. So, I mean, personally, I never like to increase an official rating unless I think the horse has performed to that rating. I don't like to guess. I like to go on facts. However, the other side of that is if the horse has underperformed and there appears to be one or more excuses, then it certainly gives you entitlement, I think, to leave the rating alone or maybe drop it one when you may have dropped it more, for example.
Yes. How much do you take into account a horse coming back off a layoff or a change of surface? Or something that we can steward? Good question.
Yeah, it's a good. It's Yeah, it's another really good question. So, for example, first meeting of the season at Taif, every horse is coming off a pretty significant layoff. So that's probably a situation where it doesn't really play into it much. But let's say... Right, but let's say on Friday or Saturday this week, all of the horses, if not most of the horses, will have run before this season. However, if there's one that hasn't, maybe it hadn't run since last season, then that's a horse that I'd probably look at and think it's probably had some kind of issue. It's probably not a horse that you want to, drop too much, but it still really depends on what it was doing when it was last on the track. So if a horse has been off for a year, 2 years, you still look at its more recent runs. If it didn't run since last season and its last 3 runs last season were all terrible, then I probably would drop it quite a lot on its reappearance. If its last run from last season was a win, I'm unlikely to drop it too much because I'd go and I'd look at the race it won, see how solid the form looked, how the race had worked out, and base the decision more on that. But I'd be inclined to drop it a little bit because obviously if it's had an issue, then it probably needs a bit more help than a horse that may have run and won 2 weeks ago, in which case last time out winner probably wouldn't get dropped at all.
If you have a situation where a horse doesn't run for 9 months, right, we delete its rating. Right? And the next time, because for all we know, anything could have happened to the horse. Right? So we delete the rating. And if, for example, it then comes back maybe 18 months down the line and needs a rating again, right? Something that I would have always done when say its rating was 83, and it hadn't run for 18 months, something like that. And its form before it got injured was not very good, deteriorating. I would drop that horse from 83 to 80 because it allows it to run in a lower class of race. Obviously, 0 to 80, you could run in that handicap. And should it be allowed into a better quality race when it was a dodgy 83 18 months ago compared with the horse that's on its way up going in that direction? So I've flip-flopped those horses because you're more happy with the more recent form. So, but they lose their rating if they don't run for 9 horse. And that's pretty much the same. Again, trying to make Saudi Arabia an international racing country. That's what we would be doing in England for 25 years. And Ireland.
What about with, say, for example, the import and the change of surface? The turf horse being imported for the first time on the here.
Well, it's something we've been talking about. For example, the custodian of the two holy mosques, the Saudi Cup qualifier, we had a few horses in that race that had never run in Saudi Arabia before. Some had never run on dirt before. And obviously, you have to take into consideration that if they don't run very well, it may be because they haven't adapted to the new surroundings. It may be the surface. It may be that the horse isn't as good. So you have to weigh you have to weigh up everything really. But something I try to do is I just try to be conscious of what you gentlemen are going to try and do with the horse. So in that last race, let me talk about this race because Mr. Smith has just called up a different race. So for example, you've got the horse Gaz, the horse that finished 4th. Got him running to 62, but put on an official rating of 65. I'm not sure off the top of my head how I came to that decision. It may be on this race or it may be on a past race. But what I'm conscious of here is that, okay, he's a bit higher than his, okay, so it's based on his previous race. But if you click back on the actual race that you just pulled up, I'm conscious of the fact that while just on the evidence of this race, 65 makes it hard for him to compete in a handicap with these top two horses, but on a rating of 65, he's also eligible for a 0 to 65 handicap, which these horses are not. So that's just another thing that we bear in mind. I think about if I was placing this horse, where would I want to go with it? Do I have an opportunity to run it in a suitable race? And that's all factored into the decisions when we're looking at official ratings.
And you can see now why handicapping links really closely with race planning, because we know what levels the horses are, and it's very important that we put on the right races for these horses, because the one thing we don't want to do is stop your horse from running. That's the most important thing, that we have to make sure they can run. All right, so that's really, really important. And just moving on to this race, you'll notice that compared with the previous maiden, another maiden, but there's one subtle difference which Stephen's going to talk about in a second. But this level, the winner's only 72. The previous maiden, 84. We tell him why, Stephen.
So I touched on it a little bit in talking about the last maiden. So this is a local bred fillies maiden, so you'd normally expect that to be a bit lower anyway. And then you've also got a situation where in the last race we had the first two had pulled 8 lengths clear, and in this race the first 5 have finished kind of in a group together. So the chances of this being a competitive race for the grade are probably a little bit less due to the fact that they've finished in a closer bunch at the front of the race. It's probably less likely that this would be a race where the winner and the second, for example, would need to be higher than in the other race where the first two had pulled 8 lengths clear.
Did you have a guide for this race, Stephen?
Well, I don't know because I did this race weeks ago, so I can't remember. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it looks like the second horse was. It looks like the second horse was 67 and miraculously ran to 67 and stayed on 67. And 2 1/4 lengths at 1,600 meters. You could call it 3. You could call it 4 or 5. I elected to call it 5 probably because the winner was hanging a bit and ran on well. It probably just gave me the impression. See, I like to look at the race and get a feel for how much I think the winner may be more superior to the runner-up, and then if the calculations back that up, then I obviously go with that. If they don't, then I might give it an extra point, but not get too carried away. But in this case, it looks like it won pretty well. So I've called it 5 from winner to second. They carried the same weight, so we don't need to worry about adjusting for weight, and that gives you the differential of 5 there, and then only 3 from second to third, which I could have called a bit more because it was 1 3/4, but I probably looked at the fact that the third horse's jockey put up a little bit of overweight, factored that in, and only called it 3.
And of course, because they're all carrying, or should all carry, the same weight in this race, right? You'll see what happens, right? The performance figure, the best one is by the winner. And if you look at the performance figures, you can see very easily what's happening. They're just getting down and down and down and down and down. But what's particularly interesting is the horse that finished 8th in this race, Jcsa, right? So this particular horse, Jcsa, goes into the race on 61, underperforms 47, left on 61, right? Reported to have hit his head. So we get, at the end of every day's racing, a race card from Mr. Phil, and anything like that, the horse is slightly injured or something happened that we haven't been able to see on the video, right? We put this on the remarks, and we find to have hit his head. He's hit his head, right? And of course, what you have a situation here, right, is you've got a horse that's rated 53, and he's ahead of a horse that's rated 51. We got lots and lots of phone calls and WhatsApps and emails. My horse has finished 8th, and the horse in front of him, right, is 53. What's happening here? They want to know. And it's always because the horse underperformed. Always because of that reason, right? The rating, remember, it's a number of performance figures over a period of time, right? It's only what it's achieved in this race. The rating is over time. Now, you had a question. Yes, sir.
2 weeks ago, we had a case where we disqualify one horse. He was second or third
Why did you do that?
because the jockey he doesn't weigh.
Okay.
So this will affect or how we will.
Okay, well, the first thing is we'll give it a performance figure. But how would you work on that, Stephen? You know, the horse gets disqualified, so he finishes the race, right? But he doesn't have the correct weight. And so you guys, quite right, you have to disqualify him. How do you deal with that, Stephen?
So I think I know the situation he's talking about. I can't remember exactly which horse it was, but I'm pretty sure that I used the weighed-in weight, so he weighed in light, correct? Was that right? Oh, he failed to weigh in. Oh, well, if he failed to weigh in, then I would use the weight that he was supposed to carry as the weight that he did carry, because that's the only thing we can do in that situation, isn't it? Yeah, I would still rate the horse as if he hadn't been disqualified, basically. Yeah.
But if it's his third run, right, he doesn't get a rating because you disqualified, right? So it doesn't count for a rating, but we'll still give it a performance figure. Remember, they're different performance figures. The ratings are different things. We'll still give it a one, and we might use it in the future.
Like the case of Green last year.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So he kept his rating even though he was subsequently disqualified. But as you know, Youssef, a difference to that would be if a horse has its first 2 runs, gets a rating, and then gets disqualified from one of those performances due to a positive sample, for example, then we would delete the rating because he no longer has enough qualifying races. But Derivo was already qualified for a rating even after the removal of the performance from the race he was disqualified from.
Is there anything else you want to say about this race, Stephen?
Yeah, you've already mentioned it, but just again, so Mr. Smith mentioned that the horse that had some excuses at the start of the race was left. So again, that's a situation where, had that not happened, for all we know, it may have won the race, but it's not my place to say that that cost the horse victory. So I'm not going to move its official rating up, but what I can do is say that that may have stopped it being able to perform to its rating, so it can stay on the 61. So we can leave it on the same rating, but we wouldn't put it up unless it exceeded its official rating.
So we've seen boys' maidens, and we saw a good boys' maiden, and we had the figure of 84. We looked at a fillies' maiden, and it was in the 70s. Right? So these are the ways in which you can sort of think to yourself, if we win a fillies' maiden, it's going to be somewhere around here. If it wins a boys' maiden, it's going to be, 84 would be pretty high for a maiden winner, right? But the 72 for the filly that we just saw, that would be around what would be normal, right? So, well, the average, yes. So you sort of, you get to know over time what's likely to happen to your horse depending on what the horse races in. But here's a completely different situation, right? Here's an Open. And look at the pre-race figures of the Open. 96, 91, 91, 91, 99, 88. You know, we all know that the quality of an Open is way higher than a maiden, right? So you can see that the performance figures, which is this one, these ones in the middle, they're the performance figures, right? That's way different from the maidens. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, one thing I do is I actually do keep, for certain races, I do keep an average, to help with time comparisons and things like that. I actually keep an average of the rating that the winner would perform to. And Open races, you know, regular Opens, not talking about cups, awards, just a regular Open race, 95,000 reals. So in this race, I keep a different spreadsheet of the performance figures, so I know what the average Open race winner of an Open race for imports runs to. I know what the average of a Open race for Saudi breds runs to, and I can tell you that in an imported Open race, the average off the top of my head is 96. So this would be a slightly above average regular Open for imports, and I believe the winner is gonna go to Dubai as well. So. Kind of backs up that notion. For Saudi breds, I think the average winning rating for those races, so basically this race, but for Saudi breds, I think it's 91 or 92. So that's something that you can factor in as well to help you level the race and to make sure that you're not going too high, you're not going too low.
This race fascinates me, all right? Look at all the comments that Stephen's made down this side. You know, he's dealing with 20-odd races every week. You know, you can't remember everything that happened in every race. So it's very important that you do these little comments here. And this is an interesting point, isn't it? The horse won nicely. Now, I don't know how that translates, but when you win nicely, it's often with the jockey just looking back at the opposition, confident that actually I've got this under control. And it's a word that we use in English, he's won nicely. You could say easily might be a bit further, but nicely means you're comfortable. And he's won that race. The second one, keen. Can a horse do his best when it's pulling all the way through the race? Possibly, that's not possible. So it may well be that this horse is better than that in the future. Once he learns to settle, maybe the horse can progress in the future. Missed the break and hung left. He can't possibly have done his best if he's hanging to one side and he's not going in a straight line. Possibly didn't stay. So in this case, right, the race is 2,400 meters. We have many less races at 2,400 meters than we do at the other distances. So this horse has got good form, but it's shorter. So what's he put on there? Maybe he didn't stay. And as a result, he's got a performance figure of 88, and Stephen's dropped him from 99 to 98. Now, we would get a phone call in England saying, why have you only dropped my horse 1? We want to be lower because maybe we want to run in a 0 to 95 race, right? So we'd get a complaint about that in England, and you get a bigger complaint in Ireland, right, for only dropping him 1 for that reason. So we would have something that Stephen could say, yes, because your form is better at shorter. So you can see that these are all the factors that we take into consideration, right? And the horse that interests me more than any other in this race is Inscribe. And you'll see that Inscribe, right, goes into the race with a weight rating of 89. His performance figure is 81, so he's underperformed. And Stephen's dropped him 2. Now, I don't know what his previous figures were, and he's put quickly away, but then restrained. Now, if I was reading that in England, I wouldn't have dropped it at all, right? I'd have kept it on 89. So I don't like to see horses break out the stalls fast and then the jockey tug them back, right? I would worry about why the jockey had done that. It doesn't happen here, thankfully, right? And this one is an interesting one, right? His performance figure is 74. He was 67, and Stephen's only rated him 72. You think, well, hang on. He's performed to 74. Why hasn't he put him to 74? Because he doesn't believe it, right? Which is why he's put here, raised to his previous highest official rating. He doesn't think that even though on the maths it's 74, he's only prepared to put him up to 72, right? Sometimes things happen in races which you don't necessarily believe to be accurate. Anybody got any questions about this? Yes, sir.
We have a practical case here, practical example. This gentleman has a question
Yes?
for his horse.
Yes? Stephen, do you want to take the whole? Stephen will put it into the system. Stephen put it in the system. 3-year-old one in Tyfe, did it? Go and show Stephen. Go and show Stephen. He'll put it into the computer. So this is great. A practical example with the owner here. Super. So be careful what you say, Stephen. Don't do anything that we could end up in jail, saying anything nasty about his horse. While we're waiting for Stephen to do that, has anybody got any questions about anything that we've just done? Yes, sir. Well, remember the great thing about a filly in an open race or in a maiden, the filly gets 2 kilograms filly's allowance, right? So if they dead heat, the filly is 4 points inferior to the boy, if they dead heat, right? So, and that's the same all over the world. Right. So which horse are we talking about? The winner? Who we talking?
He
Yeah.
won 2 times.
Yeah.
Though he got rated less than other horses who won only 1 race. This is his
It's not the number of wins, it's the quality.
who won only 1 race. While he won 2 races, 1 in Tyne, 1 in Riyadh. Just he's wondering why. He wants just to know whether he
Okay, well, as we were trying to explain, it's not how many races you win, it's not how many times you finish second, it's the quality of the opposition that the horse is facing. So, you know, it's a long time since I actually assessed this race, so it's quite difficult to come up with an explanation as to what exactly my thinking was. But yeah, but the second horse was only rated 66 going into the race. And so that immediately would make you kind of temper your enthusiasm. You'd be less inclined to give it a high rating based on this 66 here. The horse that was second, correct? I mean, you can. Well, I mean, the race was in October. It's months ago, so I can't tell you exactly what my thinking was behind the figure now. Yeah, the fourth was 89. Right. So you make a good point. So in theory, so just go back to the race, Phil.
Well, just before we go back to the race, I've just called up the fourth horse. Right? The fourth horse is called Anseli, right? And at the time, Anseli was rated 89. He was fourth here, then he was seventh, then he was fifth, then he was 16th, and Stephen dropped him to 84. So he hasn't reproduced that figure. Let me just finish this point. He hasn't reproduced that figure until
Friday.
this week. And because he's dropped the horse from 89 down to 84, because he's been struggling a bit, look what happens on Friday. That is what I would call fantastic handicapping. Right? And look how close the finish was. A quarter of a length between the first and the second, 3/4 of a length between the second and third, 1 3/4, 1 3/4, 1 3/4, 1.5, a nose, 3/4, a length, 1.5. The only place where you get closer finishes than that is Bahrain. That's the only place you get closer finishes is in Bahrain. And the advantage in Bahrain is it's all on turf. Right? That is fantastic handicapping. Right? So in answer to the question, that's what the horse deserved on the day, and subsequently it's been proven to be the right decision. Well, let's go back to your horse. But you can see why it's important to look at other horses.
Oh, got Al Sahab. Oh, that's it.
That's the
Yeah,
boy.
that's it. I mean, the other thing to bear in mind is that this horse has only had 2 races, and like we said to you, when a horse wins a maiden, you're not going to go higher. Like for example, so this is a Saudi-bred 79 would actually be an above average racing for that. Yeah, right. So then the second race, the second race is a good race. So if we click on that race, I've gone 89. But like I say, the second went into the race rated only 66. And at the time, these are 2-year-olds as well. So, you tread a bit more carefully because you're unsure as to how good they are because you don't have as much to go on. You don't have as much information. So I'm looking at times. I might be looking at previous renewals of the race. You look at the second horse, the third horse, sorry, and he won next time, so that's good. Hamza T has won since, but before Friday, she actually ran worse every time she ran. So there was no reason to change the view of the race based on what was going on until maybe Friday.
Hang on, just have one person.
I was just going to say once again, the second 1.5 kilos overweight, Mr. Brett. That's a big factor, isn't it?
Massive factor. But remember, what are we trying to do? Right? We're trying to give you 2 or 3 things. We want to give you a rating for your really top quality horses that is accepted all over the world by international handicappers. So as soon as you get to 105, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right, the international handicappers will take an interest in your horse, right, because we have a world rankings system. So if we have all of our horses too high, right, we will not get the respect of everybody around the world. Very, very important. The second thing we're trying to do is if you run your horse in a handicap, we want you to feel that you have a chance of winning, and you end up, like we just showed you, with a real close finish. What do we not want to do? We don't want to see you in a handicap beating 35 lengths. That is, we're not happy with that. Right? So we either find a reason why you underperformed, and you've seen the type of things, or we drop your rating. They're the two things. Yes, Tom?
Just in terms of this horse that we're discussing, mindful it's over 4 months ago since we've seen him, is there a plan to run him again before the end of the season?
It's not a plan. It's not a plan, Biggie.
هي أنا مطلوب أنا اسمع نقول ما ركض عندنا سنتين عندنا أهم شيء كأس المؤسسة
إيه مسجل بكرة.
مسجل
في مرة كان I think
Come on.
You running this week?
This week.
Oh, well, we'll find out.
second race.
Yeah.
If you see the second race,
Yeah.
somebody's coming like that. He was 2 or maybe 1 more than
So you think he should be 90, not 89?
yes. More.
But this is what we were trying to.
If we're only 1 out with every horse, I will die a happy handicap.
No, not talking this. I believe what you do.
You do.
But maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
But you see, what
If you see the if you see the race,
he's written it here. Stephen's put it here. Interfered with slightly over 1 out. So the next time the horse runs, right, that may be a factor. Right? He'll look back at this race and think that maybe, for example, let's say the horse runs badly this week, right? The first thing is, should we drop it? Well, maybe that's a reason why we shouldn't drop it. Because maybe last time he was a little bit better than we think, right? So you would like to be 90?
more than 90. If you
You said you
No,
were
sorry.
1 out.
So the important.
89 plus 1, that's 90 in my life.
Excuse me, mister. I want to tell you something. Because the important things here in local horses and Saudi, King Abdulaziz Cup,
Of course.
we are not every day have champion horse. When I find some champion horse, I want to keep it to the.
You want it that level? You want to
Yeah.
run it that level? Yeah, I understand that. But this horse could run in a winners of 0 to 2. He could run in an open, right? Because you can progress everything slowly, right? You've done everything perfectly so far. What's his 2 performance figures? If you go back,
79 and 89.
so his first performance is 79, his second performance is 89. I'd love to have a horse like that. Right? I'd be running him in a winners of 0 to 2, right? And hopefully he'll win again. And then he gets maybe 2. Then maybe he goes to 99.
Oh, there is no time.
There's no time. No time? How old is this horse? He's only 3.
He wants to run it this season in the big race. Yeah.
But unfortunately, there are lots and lots of other horses who hope to run in that race, and they've given us more opportunities to see how good they are. Right? So there may be a horse in that race who's run maybe 4 times or 5 times. We've had more chances to see it. The more we see your horse, the more sure we would be with its rating. After 2 runs, we may be wrong. We may be wrong. You may be right. Right? But when there's only 2 horses, 2 races, it's very, very difficult to know whether we're right or wrong. Once a horse is running 5, 6, 7 times, you know what that horse is doing. We all know what makes the right horse. You may have a horse that next year is running in 7 times. Because hopefully he will keep progressing. But the one thing that happens here, which we find strange, people want to run their horses in big races when they're very immature. And that doesn't always work for the best interest of the horse.
Sorry.
Do you agree with that?
Okay, sure. I want just one thing,
Yeah.
please. You see the second race, it was challenged with local horses and horse horses.
So what we'll do, this is what we'll do for you. We will, overnight, we will watch this race again. Okay? And the second thing we will do is we will look at the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of what they've done subsequently. And we will do, because you've come to our seminar, we will reassess your horse. Right? Now we can't promise what we're going to do, but I do promise you that we will look at the race again, we'll watch the race again, we'll look at what the 2nd, 3rd and 4th do, and if we think it's the right thing to do, we'll move it to 90.
Thank you.
If we think it's the right thing. That's not, we don't agree to do it. Is that fair? Is that fair? You haven't got another 10 something for us to do, have you?
I believe. I believe.
Okay.
And
Well, we will
I'll
this is Stephen's homework tonight.
I'm leaving tonight, remember?
Should we look at one more race before we stop? One more? Okay. So, hang on, let's leave it.
While you're getting to the next race, can you just answer how much account you take in horses that are very heavily eased in the home straight?
Well, usually not very much, because usually if they're being heavily eased, they're gonna have underperformed. So, so usually, you know, you might look at dropping them, but obviously you're not going to drop them as low as they might have run to having been eased. But yeah, you would just call it an underperformance and look at the best of the horse's previous form and base the official rating on that.
Because I know in the UK they make a big thing about right hands.
Yeah.
But this is a different setup.
Yeah, you can't expect that over here because it's so taxing, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, and here's, I think, the example you were talking about the horse didn't, the rider didn't weigh in. Is this one, Steve? Is it crossed?
Cross baton, I think it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Was that it? Yeah.
But look at the level, right? What type of race is this? Okay, it's the Ministry of Culture Cup. We've looked at the levels of maidens. We've looked at the levels of fillies maidens. We've looked at the levels of winners of 0 to 1. Look at the level here. Do you want to talk about the race?
Yeah, so this kind of underlines what I was trying to explain earlier. So I keep an average rating for the regular open races, and I told you for imports it was about 96 or something like that. 95,000 real. This is a 150,000 real cup race, and not that it dictates what I rate the race, but it kind of makes sense to think that the winner of this race has run to 102 if an average open race winner is only 96, because this is a more valuable race, and therefore it's probably going to attract slightly better horses, more capable horses, and therefore you would expect the rating to be higher, and that's what's happened in this race.
Anybody want to ask any questions about that race? Okay. So when your horse runs next time and it wins, as yours has, have a think about what you're expecting to come out of the race. What have you got in your mind about the level? And obviously, a fillies maiden winner will be quite low. A boys maiden winner will be a little higher. Winners of 0 to 1 will be a bit higher, and so on. So it gives you an idea of what to expect. And that's what I've found over the years the owners and trainers in England do. And they'll phone me up the next week and they'll say, you've given my horse 84, and we think it should only be 80, right? Because they want to run in a 0 to 80 handicap. And I will then have to justify and tell them why. And they said, yeah, but we looked at the average amount that you put these types of winners up is, you put them to 80. Why have you got 84? Well, probably because the opposition was good. It's all about what's the level of the opposition. Ema.
How do you view horses that are clearly running over the wrong distance in your view? So I noticed before here, like Sprinter, that was running it over short distance and suddenly gets dropped in at 2,000, or back the other way as well.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to answer that, Steve?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the case of Summer on Seven Hills that ran in the International Jockeys 1,200 metre turf handicap, I just left it the same because I just thought that it was just a totally unsuitable distance. But that's a horse that we obviously have a lot of information on because it's an older horse. If that's a 3-year-old that's only had 3 or 4 runs, I might drop a horse like that because I don't know for sure that it's an unsuitable distance. But a horse like Summer on Seven Hills that's had, you know, multiple chances to prove what its ideal conditions are, I just took the view that it was probably just an unsuitable distance. So, I mean, yes and no. I mean, if it had run absolutely abysmally and it had finished last and it was tailed off, then I'd have probably tried to give it something. But, I mean, the horse was running on pretty well in the home straight, you know, probably due to the distance more than anything, so I just left it the same.
I think what I would do in that type of case, Ema, is
ask me to finish
I want
off?
to just quickly, Phil.
yeah.
I want to say one last thing. So going back to proven reserves.
Yeah.
Have a look at this run on the 28th of August. This is last year, so this is this season. Does anyone know about anything about the horse that finished second in that race? In this race?
He finished second in this race. How did he get beat? How did that happen?
So earlier in the season at Taif, proven reserves beat Emblem Road. So obviously, you know, in theory, there's a case for saying proven reserves should be rated 121 because Emblem Road is now 121. But wouldn't common sense dictate that that's probably not the case? So like you say with your horse, he may well be a 95, 102. I don't know how good he is because we've only seen him twice. But just to look at the subsequent performances of horses in the race is a dangerous road to go down to say that, okay, I'll now rate him this or I'll rate him that. You like them to do it on the track before you start, you know, shifting ratings around too much.
But knowing what we know now. Yeah, that was this season. Yeah. Here's the date. 28th of August in 2021. But in fairness to Emblem Road, he was a baby. He was a baby. You know, he's matured, you know, massively. You know, he's a different horse now. And the job of the handicapper is to keep pace with the improvement. But the big problem is that horses improve faster than we can keep pace with.
Yeah, but sir, what was Stephen's point here?
So the point is, if I believe what this gentleman is saying, and that horse, forgive me about the pronunciation, but Al Sahab Al Mahdi or some. So if I agree with you and I say, okay, I can look at Corba, for example, the horse that was second, and based on what that horse did subsequently, I can now rate Al Sahab Al Mahdi 96, and then that horse runs and he finishes 5th or 6th in the race. Then I kind of look a little bit silly for doing that because I've given him a rating based on something that he hasn't really done on the track, and now I'm kind of obliged to leave him close to the new rating, which I don't really believe. So I have to stick to the facts as much as possible.
Which is why, when Stephen looks at the horse, right, and you said he should be one higher, that's the most that will happen. Right? If he thinks the horse deserves 90, he'll move it to 90, but he won't be going any higher until we see the horse run again. Last question. Okay, can I thank you for coming? I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting. There's been a few smiles, so you know, it hasn't been that dull, hopefully. Okay. Perhaps, you know, I'll hopefully come back again sometime in the future with Stephen, and maybe you can tell the owners and trainers that it wasn't too bad, you had a reasonable time, because we should have 100 people.
Yeah, we don't have that experience.
Yeah. We should have 100 people, because then that will stop us getting crazy emails.
Maybe because of the language. Sorry to say that.
Impossible. But we've got an expert out of English over there.
Then this should be announced
He's
before.
an expert, and he would be able to.
We hope that transaction had been announced before.
Okay, so we'll announce.
Simultaneous translation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sure we'll